We're gonna get started in just a second. We have the honor of having Professor Jafari with us, and he's kind of the lead instigator of these webinar series. So, Jafari, if you don't mind, I'll ask you to welcome us to these webinar and explain how it fits in our initiative.
Yes, with pleasure. Good morning, the Americas. Good afternoon, Europe and Middle East. Good evening, Asia and beyond. Thank you very much for joining us. I forgot Africa, sorry. Welcome to the webinar series. This is our fourth webinar. And I would like to tell you why I began a webinar. Basically, I just get moved to the subject because I know I have only very limited time, like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I noticed that I noticed a number of gaps. One, there was a gap between academia and the field of practice, and not much was being transferred from academia to the field of practice. So we created something which is called T-Forum, and we had our first conference in Naples in 2015, then 2018 in Mallorca, and next one is going to be in Algarve, Portugal. Then came COVID-19, and I noticed that all the webinars that are being conducted are dealing with the formal sector of tourism. Big destinations, big companies, big airlines, big hotels, big everything. And forgotten are the smaller segment of the tourism. In tourism, as you know, we have two sectors, formal and informal. And informal is being often ignored. Nobody's talking or forgotten rather. Not many people, not many articles, not many government people are talking about small operators, micro-entrepreneurs, small destinations with a few tourists, etc. And they were the people who were hurt more than anybody else. So we decided to start with our webinars, and that was the reason for giving birth to the tourism webinars. Our first one was 3 months ago, and we basically dealt with different small communities across the world. Then we had the following was about Japan, small communities in Japan with international participation, of course, speakers. And then we had the last one was about the Caribbean islands, and we had excellent participation from the Caribbean practitioners and academicians as well. Today is very different. Again, if I divide up tourism into two categories, this time I would divide it into supply and demand. And most of the articles that you read in journals and most of the seminars are dealing with the supply side. How to develop tourism, how to better manage it, how to receive the tourists, how to entertain them, how to do this. It's all about destinations. Demand, we study it when we want to generate the demand, move the demand. What is special about this webinar today is that we are trying to influence the demand, so when they go to the supply side, they are more sensitive to the requirements of the host. Not too many journal articles I've seen to deal with this. Not too many, well, I haven't seen any webinars actually or any seminars doing that. So this is very unique about this special program, and I congratulate Duarte and his panel for coming up with this theme. It's a very big, a very important theme, and it's a wonderful thing that is done for education. Based on all the articles I have read about backpackers, for example, etc., this is the best, this is the formative year for them. It leaves lasting impression on them, even when they go into full career later on. So I think your mission of study abroad program, and with the length of it, makes it wonderful, because the students are long enough over there to get the culture, the language, and immerse into the situation. So I again congratulate you, and I give you back the podium, Dorothy.
Thank you, Jafar. And I call everyone's attention to that wonderful picture in Jafar's background. That's my hometown in Portugal. So even these little details, you can see the international nature of this community we have here today. So the first person I'd like to point you to is to Ruxandra Popovici. She's graciously agreed to volunteer and kind of help us bridge languages. She works in Latin America. She introduced us actually to Danielle, Valdez, and his community in Mexico, and is fluent in Spanish and English. She's now at Purdue. And so she will be paying attention to the chat. If anybody doesn't quite follow the comments in Spanish, you can write a question in English to everyone or to her, and she'll help clarify, and vice versa. Later on, if you're stronger in Spanish and something in the English presentation doesn't make it all the way through, you can ask the question in Spanish, and Rux will be there to help fill in those gaps. So thank you so much for connecting with us. So the plan for today will be to start with two community presentations from microentrepreneurs in communities that host groups of students from North America generally. And so our first presenter will be connecting through audio only, and then Danielle will be connecting through video and audio. And we have a little presentation to share. And then we'll have a quick switch into three guests that understand and operate in the American Global Service Learning Program world, and different capacities with really complementary insights. After that, we'll make a quick break. We'll just, I'll put in a video from an NC State program that goes to Central America, to actually South America, I think, to do service work and learning, and we can stretch our legs, etc. And then we'll have Q&A, where everybody will be welcome to send questions by unmuting or through the chat. We'll try to manage that so that it's not too disorganized, but I think it should be easy to navigate that to any of our panelists. All right, so without further ado, I'm gonna share my screen with the presentation. And Viviana, if you want to unmute, I will then introduce you. Okay, so hopefully everybody is seeing the screen PowerPoint presentation. Jafar, can you give me a thumbs up if you're seeing it? Okay. Yes. Okay. So, all right. So that's our plan, our timeline or structure for today. So I introduce you to Viviana. She's from Costa Rica, from a small community called Iroquois, and she's kind of a local leader, also associated with the group, an informal co-op of women and members of her community, and they host groups of students from NC State. Viviana, are you with us? Are you able to start?
Hola.
Y puedes continuar y presentarte al grupo y continuar la presentación. Yo hago los slides.
Gracias, muy amable. ¿Cómo están todos? Bueno, mi nombre es Viviana Castillo. Soy la encargada de organizar todo lo referente con los estudiantes en la comunidad de Iroquois. También me encargo de todo lo que es la parte agronomía, ¿verdad? Todo lo que es la alimentación con ellos. Siempre intento darles una comida muy típica de la zona para que prueben cosas distintas y puedan estar en medio de todo lo que es el diario vivir de nosotros. Les comento que Iroquois es un pueblo pequeño, aledaño a la Universidad Air del cantón de Guásimo, de la provincia de Limón. Contamos con muy pocos servicios comerciales. De hecho, tenemos alrededor de 2 pulperías, así se le llama acá a los mini super. Y contamos con 2 iglesias. También tenemos una escuela, un centro recreativo muy pequeño. Somos alrededor de 350 personas, 500 más o menos. Algunas de las familias tienen que trasladarse para tener su trabajo fuera del pueblo, porque en el pueblo pues no hay lugares donde pueda generar trabajo. Otros, en cambio, tienen fincas bastante grandes, entonces pueden sembrar, pueden producir ahí mismo y dedicarse a vender. También estamos muy contentos de recibir anualmente a los estudiantes en lo que es la parte, disculpe, ¿me escuchan?
Sí.
Sí. Bueno, les comento un poquito sobre el proyecto. Disculpen que me tuve que entrar acá. El proyecto empezó más o menos alrededor de unos 8 años o 10 años. Esto fue gracias al contacto de la doctora Snyder. No sé si la recuerdan. Ella nos hizo el contacto. Entonces, gracias a esa introducción, hemos venido trabajando con People First Tourism alrededor de 8 o 10 años, donde anualmente recibimos estudiantes. Los estudiantes vienen, se quedan acá, hacen intercambio cultural con nosotros en diferentes actividades. Uno de nuestros grandes beneficios ha sido para todas las familias participantes el ingreso económico, también las mejoras y arreglos básicos realizados por los distintos estudiantes en diferentes áreas, por ejemplo en la escuela, en los centros recreativos, también en algunos hogares donde nos han ayudado mucho a mejoras. En lo personal creo que realmente nos vemos beneficiados en gran manera porque al darse el intercambio, nosotros nos enriquecemos grandemente con los visitantes y podemos darles de nuestra cultura y estilo de vida. Siempre estamos anuentes a ayudarlos no sé, a colaborar en cocina y a estar interpretando muchas actividades con ellos. Pero ahora con todo lo que está pasando, con lo del COVID, realmente se ha visto muy afectado. Por ejemplo, yo no sé si por allá he escuchado que en todo el mundo está un poquito afectado, ¿verdad? Con lo que es el COVID. Y realmente aquí han habido muchas pérdidas de empleo. Por ejemplo, los comercios han tenido algunos que hasta cerrar. Otros, por ejemplo, simplemente recortan personal y recortan horas laborales. Entonces ya eso es una afectación bastante grande. También en lo que es transporte público han habido alzas de combustible, impuestos, escuelas cerradas, en muchos de los casos. Me preocupa muchísimo el hecho de que futuras visitas de estudiantes internacionales no se den, ya sea porque tengan miedo de contagiarse o más bien que nosotros los contagiemos. Los planes es seguir con el proyecto y bueno, ojalá, ¿verdad? Y podamos tener muchos años más de esos visitantes, ya que realmente es de una ayuda bastante grande para todos acá en el pueblo y es de mucha ilusión recibirlos anualmente, es una ilusión de trabajo, una ilusión para ingresos, es una ilusión de intercambio. Realmente es un proyecto que ojalá hasta llegara a crecer y que pudiéramos tener pues la facilidad de tener hasta incluso más contactos y tener más visitantes anuales. Yo quisiera darles las gracias y presentarles pues mi humilde proyecto, gracias a People First Tourism, ¿verdad? Y estoy a la orden para cualquier duda, cualquier pregunta.
Muy bien, gracias Viviana. Y de ahora unos 50 minutos así, cuando hacemos un intervalo, puedes tal vez pensar ser una de las primeras cuestiones que les haces a estos colegas de la industria. A ver si algo que ellos dicen te suscita alguna duda. Okay, so now, thank you so much, Viviana. We'll go to the next, to the second community presentation. This is from Danielle Valdez. He is a community leader. This community has, they have something called an ejido, which is a co-op where some members of the community invest a little bit of money and time and structure, and then they get to lease the land, natural land from next to their community from the government, as long as they protect it and they use it in a sustainable way. This is actually an area of research that Rooks has been working on for a long time, and several of our colleagues here at NC State. It's a fascinating way in which the government gives rights with some strings attached to neighboring communities. And these ejido and other ones in this area, they try to use it for sustainable tourism development. So, Danielle, take it away.
Okay. Buenos días a todos. Bueno, ya me presentaron, mi nombre es Daniel Valdez. Yo soy ejidatario, el ejido Playa Grande, ya mencionaba Duarte de que es un ejido. El ejido normalmente se dedicaba a la ganadería y a la agricultura, pero a partir del año 2010, aprovechando la cercanía de nuestro territorio con la ciudad de Puerto Vallarta, decidimos emprender un desarrollo turístico. Actualmente contamos con servicio de tirolesa, recorridos por senderos, restaurante y alojamiento en cabañas. Tenemos apenas 2 o 3 cabañas nada más, pero pensamos seguir creciendo. Ha sido un reto bastante grande para nosotros, puesto que nuestra actividad no era el turismo, y nos hemos enfrentado con muchas dificultades en este andar desde entonces, desde el 2010 que iniciamos con esta actividad, porque desconocíamos el mercado completamente. Además, el sector en Puerto Vallarta está fuertemente competido, pues. Y tuvimos, bueno, recientemente la oportunidad de, Rooks nos visitó hace unos años, y ella fue quien nos empezó a contactar con ustedes, con la empresa, con People First Tourism. Y apenas a partir del mes de marzo recibimos nuestro primer grupo de estudiantes, que estuvo apenas a inicios de la pandemia. Afortunadamente en la parte de América todavía no estaba fuerte como sí estaba iniciando ya en Europa, y pudimos todavía desarrollar ese grupo sin problemas. Apenas iniciamos con eso y ojalá podamos seguir en ese programa. Y bueno, ¿cuáles son los beneficios que trae el programa hacia nosotros? Pues obviamente que se generan ingresos hacia todos los ejidatarios, y además de otras empresas locales a las cuales llevamos los grupos a visitar. Bueno, algunas de las labores que hacen los estudiantes ya cuando están en nuestro parque, pues nos ayudan a hacer algunas mejoras en la vegetación y en general en el desarrollo ecoturístico. Bueno, los beneficios pues es que exponemos a la comunidad, a visitantes que aprecian nuestra cultura, y obviamente pues la generación de empleos tanto para hijos de ejidatarios como para habitantes locales que trabajan en el parque con nosotros, pues. Esos son parte de los beneficios. Bueno, ahí tienen una fotografía de lo que es el área del restaurante de nuestro desarrollo turístico. Y bueno, ¿y qué impactos hemos tenido a raíz del COVID? Nosotros tuvimos que cerrar el parque a partir del mes de abril. Actualmente no lo hemos reabierto, estamos en la etapa de organización. Fue bastante duro para nosotros, una organización que apenas está consolidando, y viene un tema de esto como la pandemia, entonces nos afectó demasiado. Obviamente dejamos de percibir ingresos, y bueno, pues La consecuencia de estar cerrado es que se deterioran las instalaciones y los jardines, pues obviamente que requieren de mantenimiento continuo, y actualmente pues estamos en esa etapa de volver a reestructurar todo. Y bueno, ¿qué esperamos acerca del programa en 2021? Pues yo espero que a mediano plazo se puedan volver a replantear los programas, las visitas de estudiantes. Ojalá que se pueda, ojalá que se reduzcan los riesgos. Pretendemos establecer acuerdos de cooperación con socios a largo plazo, tener un esquema ya más continuo, digamos, eso es lo que yo esperaría. Y bueno, y mi preocupación es que se llegara a perder el interés en nuestra comunidad debido a la pandemia. Ese es uno de nuestros principales temores, pues. Pues es rápido, a grandes rasgos es lo que les quería comentar.
Muy bien, Daniel, gracias por traernos hasta tu realidad, que es importante para este próximo paso del webinar. Como invité a Viviana, te invito que pienses en alguna cuestión que sobresalga de esta presentación de los próximos palestrantes. Okay, so we've been, to the extent that Zoom allows, we've been brought on to 2 communities that Iroquois has tourism a little bit around it. It's close to Earth University, and as you know, nature-based tourism is really popular in Costa Rica. They have parks and waterfalls and protected areas all around them, eco-resorts, and they were wedged out of tourism. And so through these groups coming in, they're starting to understand how tourism works, what they might be able to offer, how much they might be able to charge. And the same thing with Playa Grande Eco Park. They're next to Puerto Vallarta, just a mega enclave tourism destination that a member of our lab described it as a socioeconomic apartheid that keeps all of the tourism in the resort, and these communities nearby, they're left to feed on the scraps of the industry. So collaborating with the universities allows them to kind of get a little wedge into the tourism industry, have the community members exercise on how to do business and how to polish their offerings. And Danielle and his group are already offering meals and canopy tours and interesting products like that that fit that market. Now, we are in this reality across the world where communities like these 2 were perfect labs for Northern Hemisphere students to do service and learn about cultures and about how their tools could make this planet a more equitable and verdant world, right? And then now we all are struggling with this pandemic that's affecting the whole world, and we retreat to our safety bubbles, and we're at the risk of letting down all of these communities that have partnered with us, because that's, I think, what they are. They are our partners. We were mutually benefiting from each other, and now what happens? So we have a few awesome guests to comment on this. The first guest I'd like to introduce you to is Anthony Ogden, a personal friend and longtime collaborator. Tony is now the managing partner or a managing partner at Gateway International, which provides advice to American institutions and global institutions of higher education on how to take the experiences abroad of their students kind of to the next level. He has kind of a bird's eye view of this sector. And so, Tony, would you introduce yourself? And the question I have to you is, because of your position, could you contextualize where global service learning fits in the mission of universities? Like, why are they doing this? And how do they see these communities that are like faraway labs for their students?
Well, thank you very much, Duarte, and hello to everyone. It's a real honor to be joining you today. I'm really enjoying the discussion thus far, to the extent that I understand it. Thank you, Roxandra, for adding the comments into the chat. I must say that I've been in education abroad, international education, my entire career. But I only studied abroad just a few years ago, and I studied in Argentina so as to be able to study and learn Spanish. I had a great time, but I didn't really learn much Spanish. So thank you very much for your translations there. It's great to be with you. I also, before I jump in, I want to say, go back a moment to Jafar's comment, which impressed me. And I do want to say that there has been considerable research in recent years about host community impact written from the U.S. education abroad perspective about when our students are able to study in host communities abroad via service learning programming and other types of programming. And that research is becoming more and more robust. And not to make a shameless plug, but this book here is my newest book. And in this book and so many other books just like it, there are some pretty interesting chapters written about host community impact. I would direct your attention to that. Now, as I said, I've been involved, fortunately, in education abroad for over 30 years now. And as we know, in the United States, at least, education abroad is considered or defined mostly about non-degree seeking mobility. Our students are generally not seeking degrees abroad so much as they are experiencing short semesters or academic years. And we used to hear the term junior year abroad. Well, in fact, the majority of our students now, over 68% of our students, are participating in short-term programs or programs of less than 8 weeks. And I would say over the last 15 years, we've seen a huge diversification of the modalities of which our students are studying abroad. Now, as you notice, I'm using this concept, education abroad. And now, under the broader umbrella of education abroad, we're seeing modalities such as undergraduate research, study abroad, service learning, and the list goes on and on. Service learning, as opposed to tourism, however, has really taken shape, and it's really, I'm sure we're going to talk more about that, but it really has become much more mainstream to higher education in the United States. Now, that said, it's not been without problems. There's a real difference between service. There's a real difference between service and volunteerism. And service learning, however, is a distinct pedagogy. And because of that, there have been a number of folks like me and others within higher education very anxious about having our students go to communities in Costa Rica or Mexico and other places where they go with this idea that they are some great saviors, or that they are change agents or angels of mercy somehow going abroad to help the poor and starving people in the Southern Hemisphere. That is not what service learning is about. That's not what education is about. And so because of that, there has been a considerable emphasis over the last couple of decades, even longer in fact, in helping universities not only define service learning and operationalize service learning, but to provide a structure around that engagement, because it is growing popular and becoming more popular. And we're hoping that our students are going abroad and engaging respectfully and in meaningful ways with host communities abroad, that there isn't a community identified need, that the students are there to support. And in the act of supporting and realizing that community identified need, they're able to learn and reflect in that way to become much more civically engaged themselves. Now on the screen, you see what I'm sort of, just for simplicity, I'm describing as a continuum of student learning and engagement. Now in the past several decades here in the United States, excuse me, we've been concerned with mobility education, that on the left side of your screen. And that is getting students abroad. Somehow the goal is to get students on airplanes, get them in communities abroad so that they learn in a reflexive way of who they are and how they can, to be able to engage in the world. Now with the pandemic, however, we are now seeing a cessation of programming. Many schools have already decided to cease spring 21 travel. So it might be, in fact, that the communities in Iroquois there and Mexico and so on may not see student groups coming until next summer, next May, June, and July. Now that said, what I sense that is happening on the broader scope, which actually I think is a very good thing, is that we're now seeing this expansion of student learning and engagement. And that expansion includes what I'm just very simply calling access education, where we're now leveraging new forms of virtual delivery in a blended way to support student learning and engagement. And then to the right side of your screen, you see this concept of integrated education, where we're actually more robustly considering ways to internationalize the curriculum, engage students in the life of the campus and the community in new and exciting ways. Now, of course, the goal for universities is to enhance our student learning and development so that when they graduate from our institutions, they understand the international nuances of their disciplines, that they can support their lifelong study and engagement in the world. So what I would say in response to your question, Duarte, is we're now seeing an expansion. If I were eager in the comments that were expressed thus far about hosting students for many of the very real and important reasons that were offered, well, now we need to look at new modalities of that delivery. You may not be seeing as many students coming to your host communities, but it doesn't mean that you can't still seek their engagement in new and expanded ways in responding to the community identified need that you have. And there's also still ways to engage in intercultural learning, revenue generation, and so forth. I hope that in our conversation today that we can go into some considerable depth about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you so much. So that frames it perfectly for our next guest. Adam Culley is the director of service abroad programs for NC State, and he's been kind of leading a provocateur and administrator of dozens of programs all around the world and in North Carolina and the US. And so my question for Adam is, because in his position, he interacts with the students that are doing these trips, and I have had the privilege of interacting with some of them, and I can sense in them this desire to make a difference, to be a citizen that goes through the world and creates a net positive. And I know that Adam himself has visited some of these communities and worked with them and is committed to continue to be relevant to addressing their own stated needs. So Adam, could you share with us from your perspective what's going in your mind and in your heart as you envision this future in terms of like your responsibility and your desire to be responsive to the communities with whom you've partnered in several years?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, and great to be a part of this wonderful panel. And Tony, thank you for that opening piece of it, because I crossed off some of those important key framework pieces of the work that we do. And my experiences are more of the short term, not the study abroad, longer term. And so, and when Tony said, what are those things about coming in and being that savior complex and really assuring how do we come in and at what purposes? Is it for our partners, our students' experiences, or is it to benefit our community partner, or is it mutual? And we're really trying to make sure that it's mutual, and we spend the time to prepare our students in ways that they can engage in that. And so I think that's some other groups across the United States who do alternative service break programs, their approaches are a little bit different. We've learned over the years that we want to work in community, realizing that, okay, in 1 week, what can we truly accomplish? Well, what we can accomplish is the relationships and the continued support. And oftentimes these students who may have never thought of leaving the United States or leaving the state of North Carolina even, that might encourage them to think about what are the other global learning experiences. So we really see a lot of our students continue on. And what I thought, and I like how you asked that question about what's on your mind and heart. I think Duarte knows me enough that I lead with empathy. For those who understand Clifton's strengths or have taken the assessment, that empathy is my top one, and so that really speaks to me. So I decided to include and just share a story, and this is one of our 23 partnerships, and you heard from 2 of them this morning, of what is it about the experience that these students have. And this is in Hoonah, Alaska, and it's actually the view behind me. I decided to put that as the backdrop, and that's where I was this past March as we were traveling. In fact, the university was about ready to cancel all of our programs. So we had 300 plus students and faculty ready to go, and we were almost on the no-go line. Well, our team happened to be traveling through Seattle, which those who were aware or may not have been aware, that was the hotbed at that time of all the COVID cases. And so we're coming into this very rural community. The only way to get there is by ferry or by plane. And it's a community, the highest concentration of Tlingit indigenous population in Southeast Alaska. And so I share this picture because our students were there. We've been there for 11 years. We continue to go. And it's this relationship with the community partners, the community elders in particular, and also the students in the community. And it's really a cultural exchange. And yes, we're there for a week. What's our specific project? But it's about the students engaging. You can see in that image where the students are learning about the Tlingit culture. What are the importance about this? And interestingly enough, right behind the image of our students learning about the native ways of using the land and the different products and how they use it for healing and the traditions that they have, right behind us is this, right behind the students is a brand new, the second large shipping dock. So this is a port of call for tourism. So when we think about tourism, this community went from primarily a fishing community, then to a logging, and now into tourism. And it's a community of about 500. And so when we think about impact, and we go at a time where it's not the tourist season, and they appreciate it in a way because we're there to learn about the culture and not just come and jump on the zip line, albeit that's important. It's an important like income for the community, but it's a different aspect. And so we really engage in ways, and we have those conversations of what the impact of tourism has and what the impact of that. And so that happens, and we really try to do that in more of our programs and organizations. And thank you to Duarte. We're evolving our alternative service break program to really think about those impacts. And so, and to see the students, and the last piece I would share is that I'm kind of saddened about the missed in-person opportunity and that engagement. However, we're thinking, and thanks to Tony, thinking, what are those ways that we can look at virtual experiences? And I'm looking at, in particular in Alaska and also our other partners, how can we zoom into the students are doing virtual learning? What are ways that we can get our students back in the classroom or do some panels and presentations? And so I think there's a lot of things that we could look at. So my heart is a little empty in a way, but it's also anxious and excited about what the possible opportunities are.
Thank you, Adam. So we are now evolving to narrow it down, although everybody's brought up some cool like specific stories. The third speaker is a dear colleague of mine since I've come to North Carolina, Tim Wallace, also an inspiring role model. Tim Wallace is an applied anthropologist, and he has been leading a very well-respected field school in several countries, and for a long time in Guatemala, in this wonderful place that he's been trying to talk me into visiting, and I'm remiss for not having visited yet. And so Tim has a very intimate connection with these communities. He's brought in hundreds of students over the years and has observed the impact that these students have on these families and these small communities. And he'll provide us with kind of these long-term perspective. Specifically, Tim, what I would like to ask you is, how is the presence of these types of visitors, the students that come to learn and to do service, affecting the communities in a different way from other visitors? Adam just gave an example in a small community that has mass tourists for a while, and then have these groups of students from NC State. In Lake Atitlan, there's been tourism for many, many decades. And there is also in some places a presence of these form of small group supervised travel. And then are the absence of these students affecting these communities the same way as the absence of mass tourists? Or is it a much more nuanced and piercing impact of like the closing of these communities?
Hi, Duarte. Thanks very much for that nice introduction, and welcome to everybody who's participating today. I'll try and keep my remarks brief, but because I've been working as taking students abroad for 25 years, it's hard to keep my comments confined to just a couple of minutes, but I'll do my best. As a way of background, I've been teaching at NC State University for 45 years. And during that time, I spent 25 of them taking students to countries around the world, including Costa Rica, Hungary, and then I did 18 years of the field school program in around Lake Atitlan, Guatemala, which has about 20 communities that are within close distance, within a car ride or a bus ride or a taxi ride of the hometown, which you can see the headquarters, which is Panajachel, located in the picture to the right. This is a region that has about 250,000 people, and each of the communities range in size from about 10,000 to 40,000 people. So when I did my program, we put students in individual communities around Lake Atitlan. So there were usually about 15 different communities where we had students. Eventually, my wife, who's a social work professor at NC State, also did a program. And so we were able to double the number of students that were participating and locating in different communities around the lake. Eventually, between the two of us, we had about 700 students over those 18 years. So I just wanted to quickly mention that in those 17, 18 years, student fees paid for, students brought about between $2 to $4 million to the community over those 18 years. This was, the students brought their own income, but we also paid for housing. And usually I think this is a pretty substantial amount of money. Students would stay for about 7 to 8 weeks. And during that time, they would really get to know the families very, very well. Each student had to do their own individual research project in the community. And so they themselves did not want to be associated with being tourists, as typical of tourists, young students not wanting to be tourists themselves. They see themselves, and they began to see themselves as researchers. And they developed a very special relationship with the community, and particularly with their host families. So the host families became my partners in the educational process. They helped them with their language, but they also helped them to get to know the community. Now, because many of the members of the host families that we utilized had not had students before, there was a learning curve that was needed. And so we helped them develop a set of criteria that they would use in order to be able to make their house acceptable for U.S. students. And although the students weren't expecting too much, oftentimes the local standards were far below what would be acceptable for study abroad offices around, at least at NC State and probably at other universities. So the homestay families had to develop the skills necessary for being able to handle the students, manage their food needs, manage their health needs, make sure that they got where they had to go for class meetings, help them with their help them getting to know the community, help them oftentimes with their research. And certainly by the end of the time we were working with them, the host communities knew my program much better than the students at the beginning would know. And they would just, if a student was afraid to go out in the community, they would just take them by the hand and say, here, I'll take you to a neighbor, and You can interview them. Do you have your questions ready? What kind of questions are they? Oh, the students, they're not going to like those questions, so you need to kind of change your questions. You need to improve your questions. And if they couldn't speak Spanish very well, they would oftentimes take a brother or a sister who knew more English or would be able to help to translate for them. And so there was all kinds of innovative skills that the students would develop about how to be on their own, but they didn't really oftentimes realize how dependent they were on the communities. So the families themselves developed these micro-entrepreneurial skills in how to make the home acceptable for students. And so oftentimes many of my homestay families made contacts with other institutions and began to develop as almost a year-round business of providing homestays for their families. So coming back to the particular question that you were asking me, I've talked to some of the families recently in Lake Atitlan, and they are suffering from the lack of tourists. They're suffering not only from the lack of tourists, the lack of income, and our homestay students, but also from the disease itself, which has now really become very widespread throughout Lake Atitlan. And so the community members are afraid for their health, and they're afraid for their lack of income. One of my students recently wrote to me and said, why don't we see what we can do? We're going to have a conference call with me and some of my assistant directors to figure out ways that we might be able to raise funds to help students, to help families in the short run. I think that it's a disastrous situation. It is a disaster for students, for the families in the communities around Lake Atitlan. They have no income because many of them were so dependent on tourism. So all they have to fall back on is agriculture. And oftentimes that is not enough in order to sustain them. So I'll stop now, and say anything else we can discuss later on.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to torture you to address another question in a few minutes. So I appreciate it. So I think this is a wonderful third reaction, because Tim pointed out how, to some degree, being visited by students that are doing field learning and service helps kind of, or gives the opportunity for people to develop their own self-determination, their own business, micro-entrepreneurial skills, their ability to decide which aspects of their culture are okay to be shared and how they can be shared. So in a way, maybe different from other forms of just tourism revenue, this allows them to grow in terms of autonomy, in terms of skills, in terms of resilience. And now this is where our partnerships are put to the test. Are we going to continue to be their partners and, you know, supporting them as they try to be resilient in the face of these tremendous crises? So we'll turn it back to Tony. And Tony, you work with institutions. Could you talk to us about, you know, the tensions, the pressures that institutions are facing as they look at next year, as they look at whether or not to cancel, you know, study abroad? Do they factor in these perspectives of these communities, or is that so far away from the decision making that it's up to others to consider it?
Well, thanks for cycling back around to me, Duarte, and I think that's an important question. As you see on the screen there in the middle, the little cartoon, in many ways, universities are caught between a rock and a hard place. But the truth is, this isn't new. With regard to global service learning, it has, as I mentioned earlier, and as others have echoed indirectly, and that is service learning, global service learning has been a bit problematic for international offices for a while, for universities for a while. On one side, we have increasing student demand. More and more students, and we have, and I can go in great depth on this, but we have a lot of evidence that say that incoming university students, they want to engage in service learning, whether it's in their own community here or abroad. We know that there's great demand for that. We also know that there are many students and others spending millions and millions of dollars globally to engage in this form of learning. We're also seeing, and have been seeing for a long time now, and of course Dr. Wallace is one example of that, more and more faculty members are increasingly interested in engaging their students in this sort of primary learning. Whereas once international offices were the central point of anything international student learning and engagement, now we see more and more entities around campuses are involved. Probably like Adam's office in particular. And then we also see more and more senior leaders on university campuses are saying, we want to be a community engaged university. We want our students to engage and learn with and through the community, whether that's here or abroad. And then of course, we're seeing now more and more private sector organizations coming onto our campus. And many of them are very well-meaning, well-intentioned organizations, but there are many that are not. And so it really is increasing a lot of pressure on universities. Now on the student side, the other issues on the other side are about health and safety, academic quality. Keep in mind, service learning, at least in my definition, is not about tourism, it's about education. And one engages in the service so as to enhance the learning. Hence, these are academic, often for-credit courses where they're engaging abroad so as they can enhance the course that they're taking. But it's also very important as well that we are not just descending on communities abroad, but that we are being welcomed and with a well-articulated framework for that. And then in the chat a moment ago, I put in 2 more books, not my books this time, but 2 more books about the ethical engagement in host community learning. And then of course, there's also increasing standards. So in brief though, Duarte, I think this pandemic has, this slide we could have used a year ago. This slide is still the same slide today. However, I think there is an added nuance, and that is the value proposition. And that is, how do we reframe the value of global service learning right now, which really does imply intense community engagement when we don't have control of this virus. But also, can universities really allow themselves to have their students engage in this way? And I'm afraid that it's because of risk management, liability concerns, legal concerns. Just this morning, there were numerous articles about lawsuits against universities and organizations related to this pandemic. I think we're going to have a tough spot. So again, going back to looking at the different modalities, I think if we're going to, we will see a shift. We are seeing a shift, and that shift will be permanent, but it's in a permanent expansion. We'll still see students going abroad with cohorts like Dr. Wallace is doing, but we're also going to see students are going to come to universities and say, I want to have virtual experiential learning integrated into my course. And frankly, Gateway, my company, is doing that with universities now.
Thanks, Tony.
It'll persist in time.
Thanks. Well, Adam, I think then there's a consensus among all of us that you're between a rock and a hard place. So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could comment a little bit. There's still a lot of variables, a lot of things unknown, but could you comment on maybe some thoughts you and your colleagues in the office are having in terms of your own adaptations to this new reality for next year? And maybe, you know, how can communities that have been hosting also consider ways to adapt and cope and be ready for partnerships, the next level or the new level of partnerships?
Yeah. Well, as you're probably well aware of, and many as well, like, we're not traveling. NC State is not traveling. So to answer the questions on some of our partners, no, March is not happening. Summer, probably doubtful. Who knows, fall? Maybe not international, but can we do more local, regional experiences that also support some of our partners? So the work that I do is not necessarily all global. In fact, we've seen a shift where we've now moved, at least our shorter term programs, we used to have more international than we had domestic, and we're actually finding we're having more domestic experiences for a variety of reasons. But I think one is the funding challenges, and we wrestle with this. Like if we're spending X amount of dollars to go to location for 1 week, what's the value of that experience, and how do we mitigate the fact that, you know, could those funds be used other ways, but yet that experience of in-person working with partners, and maybe I'm answering that later piece is like, how do we work alongside organizations and groups and communities that are already doing this work, so it's not necessarily reliant on us coming in at one time. And that's where I think it's helped us really look at and kind of answer that question of like, well, what can you really accomplish in 1 week? And I said, well, we're working alongside and we have these partnerships. It's not a one and done, and how we continue to work with them year after year after year after year. In some cases, it's been 15 years with some of our partners. We build that up, and can we go multiple times throughout the year? And so some ways that we work around that, we've had a couple 1 credit bearing opportunities. We've dabbled into that piece. But one of the things that we're obviously is that can we get a vaccine that works? And then when do the numbers go down? But then we're also thinking, great, we've got the mix of flu coming in. So now we've got a mix of a storm. So that I think really precludes us for the spring. And that would be in any season. We're always concerned about flu, because I think in other parts of the world, it tends to last a little bit longer than it does here in the United States. Not to mention, do some of these communities and who gets the protection, and does the global, you know, how does it fit within the global model? So I think we're in it for a good while as far as when we open up. Some of our partners may be ready and willing. Some countries may be open for tourism, but our university, because of legal and risk management reasons, could very well make a decision that that's not happening. And so I think those are just the realities. And then we got to think about, in some ways, what are the parents? They have an influence on these young 18 to 20-year-old students in decision making. And so that's, and I think to Tony's point, like these aren't like a year ago, these would be the same issues, but I think now we're layering it, and that we're doing things more virtually. And so what is it that we need to consider with our partners? And just a couple examples, we probably our longest standing partner in the Dominican Republic, they did virtual, what do they call it? Virtual internship, but they can continue alongside of working within the classroom for the students that they're doing, and they have that longer term partnership. And so they've dabbled in that. It's like, wow, what does that look like for some of our partners? And how do we include that? And maybe there is a travel component. And because our students are going to be used to this. Our study abroad, I was meeting with an individual who their position now is to establish virtual study abroad internship experiences, which I thought was really fascinating. And what does that look like? So I think this will just really spin off in so many ways where I think we're going to have these experiences, but they'll look differently. And also for me, and I'm talking with my other colleagues who do these shorter experiences, wow, this really just opens up, and we've done this with one of our partners, but the pre-departure experiences and being able to really learn and engage and meet with our hosts before we get there, so to build that relationship. So I think those are some aspects that we can all think about as well. And then the last piece that we're looking at is the growth and purpose. And making sure, and I mentioned this before, but is it to the benefit of the student? And in some cases, students, want to go and help or go and fix, but how do we help them understand that it's all about serving, but that in that mutual beneficial relationship, and so that we're welcome in the community, and we're not a hindrance, we're not a burden, and they're not just trying to find some busy work for a group of college students to come in, but what is that interaction to be able to go in the image there? It's like, wow, I don't know when we'll be able to get to RDU and just load up and go to a distant location. So those are just some thoughts and just realities of what I think NC State is working with, but we're currently engaging in that dialogue of what is that next iteration. So
great, thank you so much. All right, so turning it back to Tim, back to your intimate connection with this community that you've been there for 2 decades, and there have been fluctuations in the visitation from different kinds of tourists, maybe because of political stability or health issues or the economy in the market, in the North America or in Guatemala. So can you reflect on that observation, see how has those communities, how they have been resilient over those crises, and how can they remain so in this super dramatic moment we're living now?
Thanks, Duarte. Well, I hate to sound pessimistic, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. And as I said before, I actually live in Guatemala in the Lake Atitlan area 6 months out of the year. And we came back for our usual visit in early March, and we haven't been able to go back yet. The airport in Guatemala City is opening this month, we hear, probably, maybe. They keep changing that every so often. So the situation is dire at this particular point in time. People have no money. People are getting sick. The health system is overwhelmed. So if we're talking about a place like Guatemala, we couldn't expect universities, mentioning that risk management idea, to be comfortable with sending students to places that themselves are overwhelmed with the effects of the pandemic. So the communities themselves, or the homestay families, are hunkering down. They are bringing within, they're bringing their family together. They're looking for ways to make money and through the smallest means possible. So I don't think that that students would be going to Guatemala in the spring coming up, or in the summer of this year. I think the earliest it would be the summer of 2022, actually. So what can we do in the meantime? And I think that the other panelists have suggested working virtually with members of the community, maybe perhaps the whole community, in thinking about what kinds of things can we do to prepare for the future. I think that if communities begin to feel comfortable working virtually, that these kinds of person-to-person interactions that we have, maybe through Zoom or through some other techniques, we can give them some ideas of how to begin to prepare, how to begin to think about what they need to do in order to be ready for when students come, so that they can be among the first to receive students rather than being among the last to receive students. So we need to work with them in order to think about opening and preparing. I was working with some folks from the Guatemalan Tourist Agency back in early April, and I was amazed at how little thinking had gone on even among the Guatemalan tourism developers about how to prepare for the future. They have no idea. So I think that those of us, even in the United States, we have had so much unfortunate experience with COVID-19 that we have some ideas about what they can begin to do to think about preparing. The last comment I would make is that, as I referred to in my previous comments, this might be an opportunity to contact our former students that have gone abroad and say, what can you do to think about these students? Some of these are no longer students, and maybe they themselves can travel, be our vanguard to go down and help them think about, maybe there could be a few students that are brave and not worried about the disease itself, at least, maybe in the spring, and begin to work with them on a one-on-one basis. So maybe we could really think about tapping into our previous student cohorts who are not stuck within the issue of risk management to help communities think about how to prepare.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So I think an idea that is emerging then is that we need to remain involved with these partners, and as Tim mentioned, try to help them find a path towards reopening, and in the meantime do so in a way that they can maybe earn some income, that they can be engaging with us. And one thing we're trying to do in this small community tourism webinars initiative is to create these thematic webinars and then create resources, a library of resources associated with it. You may notice that in the announcement for these webinar, each of the panelists had provided a little resource for us to read and prepare for this discussion. And I would just invite for any participants today, if you have any interesting resources to share about this topic, about how communities can adapt, that, you know, stay in contact with us, and we'll try to curate a good list of tools that we can have in this section of these inside this volume of our webinar series. Okay, so this takes us to a moment to take a little break, and what I'll do is I'll get out of the presentation. I'll show just a 1-minute video to just get a reset. Everybody can stretch your legs a little bit, and please use the chat to pose some questions, and then if there's need for clarification, you can also unmute, and our community representatives and our panelists are invited to address those. If you want to just make a general question, do so. If you want to direct it to somebody, that's okay too. All right. So I'll go to our video. And I'll share again. I'm going to stand up a little bit to give an example to everybody to stretch. Meanwhile, I hope the chat can start getting lively.
We're going to go 5 different communities within this province and provide healthcare that they would normally get on a daily basis, while also partnering with the medical clinics that are here locally in this department.
If I may comment, Duarte, on that piece, and again, to thinking these weren't just students going down in a one-time clinic in Ecuador. When we think about partnerships, we actually, in this case, it's an organization where the medical facility is there consistently throughout the time. So it's not like this, great, you come in, and I think I've heard a lot of medical brigades go in and they provide medication, maybe a diabetes clinic, but then there's no follow-up as far as what did it do? They don't have any other regular medical practitioners. So our students, along with medical staff from the US, were able to go work alongside their local doctors in a setup where they're continually providing healthcare and they have electronic medical records. So it's like one of those experiences where we felt really good about that kind of work. And the student who started that a number of years ago is now, well, actually is a medical practitioner now, went as one of our providers. And so seeing the cycle back from a student who started that experience, who's gone through medical school and was back as a professional, one of the medical providers that went down to the brigade. So that's a little bit more of the backstory for that piece that we have there.
Thank you, Adam. And you know what that makes me reflect on is, you know, the American institutions, probably, you know, large institutions, budgets are always tied with certain kinds of allowable uses and not allowable. And I think a lot of that funding has been trickling to these communities through the student fees and the earning of credit or the experience, which made it possible to make those payments. It'll be interesting to see the kind of financial creativity that will need to be used to do virtual engagements with communities, which will all be new and maybe difficult for a large institution like this to just allow a lot of creativity in that process. But hopefully we'll be able to find ways. All right, so let me see on chat.
Duarte, while you're looking at the chat, maybe I just offer one quick comment on that. I think if you remember that continuum I showed, what we're seeing with other forms or other modalities is that we're appealing to a greater diversity of students. Whereas the students who were formerly engaged in mobility-based education, you know, they had to have money, they had to have opportunity, they had to be self-motivated to be able to participate. Now that we're seeing other modalities arising, in fact, statistically, I'm seeing in some various case studies is that it's appealing to a brand new segment of the student body. Not in lieu of, but in addition to. I think with virtual engagement, if we can leverage that effectively in a service learning context, we're actually going to be able to reach out to a broader diversity of students and thereby a broader diversity of perspective.
Good point. I remember our early work together, Tony. We talked about the ceiling effect on how much learning, how much growth students could experience by having study abroad, because many of them were already very globally engaged. And so this was study abroad, you know, in that formal sense, was a way for them to exercise their already high levels of global citizenship. Whereas the faculty-led programs, if they were well tailored, they were more democratic. They were capturing students that were kind of getting started in that world, and it was a lot more, had more potential for growth.
What we don't want to do, however, is create a system of haves and have-nots. In other words, what we don't want to say is, okay, the rich white girls can actually study abroad, but everybody else can do virtual. It shouldn't be seen as something that is status-oriented. It really should just be seen as an expanded repertoire of ways to enhance student learning and engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Danielle, Viviana, would either of you, Danielle, tú y Viviana, ¿tienen alguna cuestión para follow up a estos panelistas?
Yo solo tendría una pregunta. ¿Qué expectativa tienen ellos para los viajes del próximo año? ¿Creen que se puedan realizar todavía o?
Mm-hmm. So Daniel is asking, so very clearly, what are your perspectives for next year's trips? Tim was maybe the one that most clearly indicated, at least from his perspective in Lecatitlan, it's not likely to. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so Daniel, yo quisiera preguntarle a usted, ¿qué es lo que se ha hecho para preparar la comunidad para la llegada de estudiantes? Entonces, nosotros tenemos que escuchar de ustedes cómo están con el COVID y qué preparativas están haciendo para recibir estudiantes para contrarrestar la situación de la pandemia.
Bueno, se han tomado bueno, nosotros todavía no reabrimos. Obviamente que en la reapertura se van a tener que tomar las medidas que se están recomendando a nivel global, pues tener más cuidado, guardar distancia, usar gel antibacterial constantemente, el uso de mascarillas, pues. Se tienen que tener ciertos cuidados, obviamente, ¿no? Por respecto a la pandemia, pues, eso es lo que se podría hacer, vaya.
Pero de mi punto de vista, para estar entre los primeros que puedan recibir estudiantes, será necesario que ustedes estén más proactivos. O sea que es necesario que en vez de, bueno, como usted ha dicho, hay esas cosas, pero es necesario que ustedes se han reunidos, han discutido, esto es lo que vamos a hacer, para hacer una lista que se puede preparar para enviar a las instituciones internacionales que puedan enviar estudiantes donde ustedes. Entonces, ustedes tienen que demostrar que están conscientes que la situación en cuanto a la cantidad de casos es bajo y que ustedes ya son muy inteligentes y muy listos, preparados para recibir estudiantes. Y eso, entonces, por ejemplo, pueden haber hecho reuniones, hemos hecho esto, estamos haciendo esto, punto por punto, cuáles son las cosas que están haciendo para recibir estudiantes, ¿no? O sea que tiene que ser de los dos lados, uno de la comunidad diciendo que hemos hecho esto y de nosotros que estamos enviando estudiantes decir pues que nosotros estamos más confortables porque ustedes han hecho esto, sí, y con esto ya podemos decir donde los padres de los estudiantes y con los estudiantes decir que, bueno, esta comunidad ha hecho esto y tenemos mucha confianza que no van a haber ningún problema.
So I will add, and Danielle, yo voy a responder en inglés, pero Hooks está en el texto, si puedes ver, y ya va ayudando a comunicar. Hooks ahora va a estar trabajar mucho duro. So what I would say, Danielle asked, what are the perspectives for next year? And then Tim followed up with a question saying, can you tell how much you have worked to be ready for, or how you will be ready for the next programs? And I guess my reaction to that is that observing how savvy destinations around the world, so bringing back the tourism perspective, how they're going about trying to open as soon as possible. Entire countries like Portugal, they are the ones that come up with some guidelines so that people like Danielle and Viviana know how to get prepared. And so I think my question then to Tony and to Adam is, what would be the organization in the United States? What would be the aggregate of institutions that could be nudged to create a set of guidelines that they recommend to these host universities, things that are realistic, and knowing that in this kind of field, it's going to be very case specific. For example, Danielle's community has built this facility in the forest, and they can have a set of members of the community that are quarantined along with their visiting group, and they don't stay with their elders in the community, and they stay, they social distance from everybody else. But in Viviana's community, because the experience is intimately, it included homestays and everything, that would have to be much more adapted, right? So in the United States or North America, what organizations would be in the place or the responsibility to ease this transition, to provide hints for communities to get themselves proactively ready for when trips are possible?
You want me to jump in, Adam?
Yes, please.
Well, I think there are a few points happening there, Duarte, and it's a complex question. We do have our professional associations, many of which are trying to pivot in the way that you're suggesting, about helping to provide a framework, helping to provide best practices or guidelines and so on. And I can tell you all of those associations, but truly I think it comes down to not an association. It will come down to the individual institutions' risk tolerance. No matter how you develop or shape a program, every institution will see it quite differently. And with regard to travel, the institution's exposure to risk management, honestly, I think service learning is probably going to be one of the more complex types of programming modalities, because it is by design community-based engagement. Therefore, it's how do you social distance in the community-based engagement, whereas study abroad is more tied to classroom learning, which has its own set of complexities. There are a number of, as we know, companies and organizations and institutions as well that provide programming, or these third-party providers, and they have recently organized themselves into a collective to actually address some of these questions, and I'm quite eager to see where that goes. But right now, I think most general offices at universities that have to raise money, they have to pay for their own fees and bills, that they are pivoting to explore revenue-generating models. I'm sorry, there's no real empathy right now and paying attention, in my opinion, to host communities. I think it's more like, how do we pay our bills? How do we keep ourselves from losing our jobs? Many of us are losing our jobs. And so what I think that there's a pivot to new modalities. And again, I say that in every comment, there are new modalities happening that can not just carry us through the short term, but actually expand the population in true and meaningful ways over the long term. My sights are set on the long term. And I think any host communities that are focusing right now on how do we leverage for the long term will be better placed than short-term gain.
Thanks. Adam?
Yeah, it's interesting because our study abroad was just having a conversation of how do we just keep our employees here, and that is spot on. Like, and I work really closely with our programs with them, and it is kind of, it's a challenge. And you know, and another thing is, at least for our experience, is that even if a community is ready to accept us, but if our State Department says, nope, there's a level, you know, even if it's a yellow or if it's a red, like, you know, we have to go through so many hoops to even get permission to even go. And so, you know, that's a level. Like if, you know, for a number of times, well, before things really kind of got a little more tense in Nicaragua, we felt like it was the location we were going was very safe. It was away from all the travel, you know, more the challenging areas of where you probably should be, or the recommending not to be, but we still couldn't go. Even though we know our partner was there, and it was in a community that was, you know, relatively safe. There's no safe community in the world, even here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I mean, wherever you are in the world, like safety is just, it's around us, or risk is. So I see that as a part of it. We'll probably look at what the World Health Organization is saying, what our CDC, as far as like, who are some of those maybe agencies as far as we're going to take those recommendations. And the other, this is an anecdotal question and thought that I had is, are our students, like their psyche and just even being around people, because now we're in a way of being so isolated and not being around people. And I'm seeing this in my 10-year-old daughter when we go to places and she's like, it's too busy, we need to leave. And you know, just the even emotional and psychological impact that, how do we transition back into going to these locations and getting on a plane or hopping on a van. And so I think there's just some of those implications we don't even know yet.
Great. All right, so we have maybe 5 more minutes. I wanted to mention that someone on the chat pointed out maybe, you know, form of engagement with communities abroad with whom institutions have long-term partnerships is to assist them in producing things that can be retailed and shipped. And so students are kind of helping them create revenue on their own accord with their own culture, but from a distance. And so I wanted to ask any of I think Tim unmuted, maybe Tim would like to make a comment. We have time for just a few more comments, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll ask Professor Jafar Jafari to have a few comments, and then we'll close. So Tim, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think that it's hard to begin to organize that. Guatemala has some infrastructure for typical tourist type goods that could be exported, but many of the community host families aren't people that make those things that people want. But it is a possibility, but I don't think it's a stable source of income, and the amount that they get from those is quite low, and the cost for exporting is quite high. I could go on and explain all of the different kinds of issues with export. I just want to come back and say, you know, following up on Tony and Adam, is that I just feel like that we who've been working there have a responsibility to continue working with the community. And you know, as Danielle was talking about getting ready, I think it's really essential that we help the communities think about how to reopen. And I think Adam's mention of how do we Americans readjust to, you know, being in, you know, in with everybody all the time. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take time, but the more we talk about it, the more we interact with others, and we hear what they're saying in Colombia or Guatemala or whatever, that's going to help us better get going faster when conditions are available so that we can get going. Otherwise, we're going to be at the end of the line rather than at the beginning of the line.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so I reflect often on a story about an American kind of savior that went to a valley in Africa and noticed that the farmers were growing coffee, and they were not making much on their crops. So he started a direct sale through his church in America, and for maybe a decade, that whole valley started making a lot more income from their coffee production. And then he passed away, and from one day to the next, all of that valley had no supply chain to sell their product. And so that generated a tremendous shock in local societies. The crops were lost and not sold because the retailers were not buying the coffee from that people in that valley anymore. And so the net impact of that person's life could arguably say that it was pretty negative, right? So it would be a tragedy if books that are written in this field in the next decade would be about the demise of all these communities that were supposedly equitable partners with American institutions. I think we need to get on top of these issues and be imaginative, innovative, and realist. And you know, maybe a discussion like this is what was needed. I don't know if there were similar discussions like this before, but I think we need to be confronted with this reality, and hopefully the word gets out about these discomfort we're all feeling now. And there's no like prophets in this presentation suggesting that there's an easy path forward, but maybe we get into an all hands on deck at researching this and facilitating it and nurturing relationships. So with this, I think we're on top of the time. I would invite Jafar to, if you would like, to comment on all that's been said today. Would you have some words, Jafar?
Yes, thank you very much. A very informative discussion. But I can't stop feeling lost as what these small communities can do. Again, remember the formal, informal sector of tourism. Formal means big entities, and they know where to go. They know what to do. They know what questions to ask. They know which ministry to go to, which agency to go to. Small communities, they even don't know where to go to. They have no idea what to do. They're really lost. So when we say the communities can get ready for when we come back in next year, and we are not quite sure when next year, that's not very helpful. We need to tell them how to get ready, in what areas they need to get ready. And we can, at the same time, if we have any professional obligations, we can help them to help themselves in their own countries. These are the people you need to get in touch with. These are the agencies assigned for it. So they really don't know where to go. That's the problem. Coming back to us, what we can do for them, this is our 4th webinar, and it's becoming very clear that the essence of tourism are changing. You know, remember the sand and the sea, so on and so forth, and other S I wouldn't mention. It's becoming different, but there are still S type of things. They are becoming safety, security, sanitation, and sympathy. Sympathy is the word, the synonym for empathy that Adam was using, but it begins with E, so I have to use the sympathy. yes, these are the areas we have to work with them. What does sanitation mean? Well, for your students means something, and for them something else. So that's the communication. If we want to help them, we need to tell them how to provide a secure environment. Okay, what is security? What is security in our mind is very different from security in their minds. And sympathy, I think training needs to be done to empathize with the host, to empathize with the tourists, to empathize with the workers. We have not been doing that. Marketing has been our tool all the time. How to get a tourist, just grab them in any way we can. So I think we have to move in that direction. So still we can help this community, especially universities that had this long relationship. There's a professional obligation, and individuals like Tim who know the language, they are really able to help the local communities to go to local resources, to local agencies for help. I just don't mean Tim, I mean anybody who is working with those communities need to do that and prepare them to go. As you may have noticed, everybody and Duarte, in order to transfer knowledge, we need to use a language. And in order to use a language, then which language do we use? And today, I'm sure a few people were an inconvenience with the part in Spanish. So we also thought, the webinar series also thought about the situation that if we want to transfer the knowledge, the know-how to these small communities, by and large, they don't speak English. So if the goal is to communicate with them, to help them, to assist with them, to get them ready for whenever it happens, we need to communicate with them in their own language. So the webinar series decided that we have a special edition series in local languages. And we are beginning actually next week. The speakers would be speaking, speakers could be located in the country of the language, or they could be located out there, but the language is going to be one language. So the first one we are going to use a week from today is going to be in Persian or in Farsi, and all the speakers are Farsi speaking individuals. We have already arranged one in Spanish, 100% Spanish. One for Portuguese, 100%, and Chinese, I just finished, discussed with them, 100% in Chinese. So we are covered, we want to do 1 month, more or less, we call them special editions. And then we have our regular, like this one, every second Saturday of the month. So I welcome ideas from you. If you would like to step forward and do a webinar, so you're quite invited, quite welcome to send us a proposal to do a panel in English. Then you have to, we need to identify the theme, etc. But always the theme has to be in relation to informal sector of the tourism industry, not a formal. Small communities, small entrepreneurs. If you want to propose one in local languages, I just mentioned 4 of them, 5 of them. Of course, we are ready to do that as well. The idea is to transfer knowledge or know-how to the people who can use it. And that is really, most of us are in education, and it is our obligation to transfer knowledge. I don't want to make it longer because we are already on the hour. I want you to know, the audience, that it's not 1 or 2 or 3 persons working on putting this webinar together. Duarte is one of the architects. And then we have Kazem, Dr. Kazem Bafadari, who's in Japan, and I see he's already attending past midnight. And Reza Sultani, who is in Laos, and he's another partner. So we are a team of 4 persons so far, and we are expanding the team to another 10 persons of curators to help us to produce something more meaningful. So please step forward and offer your ideas or your themes, your suggestions. This is like a journal. We are going to treat this like a journal with the special editions, guest speakers, etc., etc. And we are going to continue with that all the way through the period of COVID-19 and beyond that, because our commitment is in the small communities that small entrepreneurs. So the commitment is not really locked or in relation to COVID, but it's way beyond that. Back to you, Duarte, and thank you very much for your participation.
Thanks, Jafar. Maria, do you want to speak? We have time for a quick comment if you would like.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you, Tony, very much. I have a long time working for study abroad, service learning programs, creating service learning programs, trying.
Maria, your sound is muted again, maybe. There.
Something is pretty bad with this, but next time it won't be. I promise it.
Yes. All right.
Well, I said we have had good times and very bad times.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have different experiences in terms of how to face the things that are coming. Unfortunately, in South America, in Chile particularly, in Chile, Brazil, in the southern cone of Latin America, we have had very tough problems with the COVID. So most of our population is in quarantine, and this has been very, very long in time. So I'm talking about 6 or 8, 7 months, which are in quarantine, not in quarantine. We come back, we don't come back. Well, that is has been very strong affection in study abroad. Even I'm not directly today involved with universities. I keep my friends, and I have all my. I belong to a huge committee in the 5th region in Valparaíso, Viña del Mar. We put together a number of universities and Institute of Commerce, and also benefit institutions, which are put together in order to enhance experiences. So they are working hard. What I heard this morning, I'm going to put this on that forum.
Thank you.
And I will tell you what I think about it. My first thought as person is that service learning opportunities and internships are extremely good for both sides, American and local communities. First of all, we have some special experiences, like, for instance, a number of small business entrepreneurials, which is very helpful. So I hope that through this forum, with universities and with chambers of commerce, I will try to see, and I will tell you what I'm thinking. Maybe I may try some ideas.
Thank you, Maria. I appreciate that. It's great to have you in the forum. And this is a perfect segue to my closing remarks. In small community tourism webinars, we're trying to address issues that are difficult. And I think we'll all agree that, we're all a little bit uncomfortable at this moment as we hear of these problems, and we can't envision an easy fix for the situation. But we're all, probably all of us, I'm sure all of us are deeply committed to having a life of consequence and a career of consequence. We've been saying that we are doing these things for the sake of the students' growth so that they can be better global citizens. And we want to do this with partner communities in a responsible way. And one chapter that we had as a resource for this webinar from Tony And a colleague lays that dilemma really very well. We have no excuse to be naive. Oh, we didn't know that, when things got tough, that this was going to be expected of us. It is expected of us. We need to do something about it. We can't just tell communities that they need to figure it out, because we've been saying we are, committed partners all along. So in this particular volume, we will do our best to put resources so that other colleagues and institutions can use them. And any of you that have any suggestions, please go to the website and contact us, and we'll look at ways to share those kinds of tools. And like Maria mentioned, please get the word out. We had a lot of people register. I think some are following us through YouTube, but we could now, the secret of these things is to do these meetings, record them, and then share them many, 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 many times. And so we will have this on the website, easily accessible. It's just easy to remember, tourismwebinar.com, and point that to your colleagues. And if they want to sign up for other webinars that will be kind of related to this topic, as Jafar mentioned, there will be a schedule there of upcoming webinars and ways to get engaged with us, proposing your own themes. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to Danielle and Viviana for connecting with us from their communities. And thank you to all of the three panelists as well for sharing, their discomfort and their insights in this topic. And farewell, be healthy, and we'll see you.
And thank you very much, Duarte. Hasta pronto.
Thank you. Obrigado. Ciao a todos.
Ciao. Gracias.
Gracias. See you later. Danielle, thank you. Bye.
Ciao.
Gracias.
Ciao.
Chao, chao. Gracias.
Ciao, Viviana.
Gracias. Que estén muy bien.
Gracias.
Igual tú, cuídate. Take care, please.
Take care, Maria. Time to go to the gym, Tony.
I'm going to go eat breakfast.
Adam, thanks for doing this, and you too, Tim.
Sure. Happy to do it.
Bye, folks. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Brooks.
Thank you. Bye.